liturgia non come a qualcosa di polveroso, di statico, ma qualcosa di vivente e che deve dare risposte alle grandi questioni della società, del mondo. In qualche modo l'incontro di stasera, anche se è indipendente da quello, è un tentativo di risposta, perché appunto dedicato a un tema che è al cuore delle preoccupazioni del mondo, al conflitto religioso, a chi si combatte in nome di Dio, e a una risposta, ma talvolta una risposta problematica. Questo sarà il tema della lecture di Heiner Bielefeldt, che è la risposta della libertà religiosa, un grande principio, un principio straordinario, uno dei diritti, per qualcuno la prima libertà, e tuttavia anche, come sentiremo stasera, un diritto, un principio, una libertà controverso e talvolta anche utilizzato per fini opposti rispetto a quelli di chi lo ha pensato, di gran parte di coloro che lo hanno pensato. Questo è il senso della nostra iniziativa di questa sera, il senso della proposta di questo tema all'attenzione di un'intera comunità di ricerca, quindi non soltanto, ripeto, delle scienze religiose, perché è un tema che ci riguarda tutti. E quindi un grazie sentito da parte di tutta l'equipe del Centro per le Scienze Religiose per questa scelta, e un grazie a voi di essere qui, e la parola al nostro Presidente Profumo.
Grazie, grazie Direttore. Se mi permette switcherei all'inglese anche nel rispetto del nostro ospite. Authorities, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, for more than 40 years, religion has been core to the vision of Fondazione Bruno Kessler. The silence of religion in the life of individuals, families, and communities, in this region and beyond, prompted us to be concerned with the experience of faith in the divine. As an institution in charge of developing culture, we have been looking at and interacting with living religiosity, religious theories, and the intersection of faith, history, society, and politics. We discharge our mission in a land with extraordinary ties to the Roman Catholic Church, in the city where the reform of the Council of Trento took shape. We accompanied the trajectory of the Catholic community in Trentino, to which Paul VI entrusted the mandate of fostering ecumenical and interfaith dialogue. Because of all of this, Fondazione Bruno Kessler has always looked at the religion not as a rigid abstraction, not as an untouchable set of propositions and ossified transitions, not as an authoritarian top-down imposition, but as a dynamic life experience, a rich and evolving melange of tradition and renewal, and as the social and institutional conversation between individuals, communities, and leaders. Also because of the history of religion in Trentino, Fondazione Bruno Kessler has taken an interest not only in Roman Catholics, but in the whole panoply of Christian denomination and world religions, old and new, and as well as in the endless emergence of new forms of religiosity, spirituality, and the relation to the sacred. Such concern for religion has only increased with the transition from Istituto Trentino di Cultura to a fondazione devoted to innovation-based growth in research, society and economy, where humanities partake in the handover of science and technology. Building on the inscription of religious change in the DNA of both this land and the Fondazione Bruno Kessler, our mission has been identified in the study and the improvement of the interaction between religion and innovation. Accordingly, we engage with innovation with religion, covering texts, traditions, doctrines, and institutions, as well as with the contribution of religion to innovation in science, technology, business, politics, and the law. The strategic plan of the Center for Religious Studies for the next 3 years articulates the mission in the crucial areas of, first, conflict and violence. Second, the connection to spirituality of private and collective lifestyles. Third, the impact of science and technology on values and beliefs. And fourth, the interpretation of text, doctrines, and traditions. We carry our mission by interacting with the local community and by reaching out to the global world. Absolute protagonists of religious studies have recently lectured in this room, including Jürgen Moltmann in May and Harvey Cox from Harvard University this week. We endeavor to make our research and action fully in line with the international standard, thus coordinating with the national and international partners and pursuing financial sustainability. We submitted the application for European funds, in particular on security and religion, together with the National Arma dei Carabinieri and the School of Police of Baviera. We are signing an agreement with a pool of European and Canadian universities within the EU-funded project for European governance based at the University of Luxembourg in view of a common doctoral project on deep religious disagreement in the public sphere. We are fully aware of the emergence of religion as a key factor in the contemporary global geopolitics. While sticking to our specific competence and mandate, we do not turn a blind eye to widespread anxieties about the pros and cons of religions and to the political and social implication of what we, as an institution carrying research and action in this field, do to and with the religions. Our guiding principle is respect of human rights, which we understand as being universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Although no single rights can be duly protected if unraveled from broader tapestry of right, we cherish in particular the freedom of those individuals and communities who experience religion. International and constitutional law does not ensure an absolute right to manifest one's own freedom of religions or beliefs. However, it does provide for any restriction to such right to be restricted, scrutinized, and adopted through due process of law. We could not have in Trento a better living witness with human rights in general and right to freedom of religion or belief, in particular than Professor Heiner Bielefeldt, a distinguished philosopher and professor of human rights at the University of Erlangen. Our guest has served since the year 2010, as the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief for the United Nations. In this capacity, Heiner Bielefeldt has been involved in fact-finding missions in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Sierra Leone, Jordan, Lebanon, Paraguay, Cyprus, Denmark, and other countries. He is the author of groundbreaking report for the United Nations on, amongst other themes, violence in the names of religion and religious discrimination in the workplace. As his mandate at the United Nations is coming to an end, Professor Bielefeldt has been appointed as a member of the panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief of the Organization for the Cooperation and Security in Europe. Tonight, we have the privilege to share his unique blend of personal commitment, institutional experience, and theoretical input on vital issues on which depend the present and the future of religion and mankind. He will discuss the contemporary challenge of religious freedom and argue in favor of approaching such a challenge as a healthy provocation. Dear Professor Bielefeldt, many thanks for being with us. The floor is for you.
Buonasera. Ok. Nella scuola avevo latino durante 9 anni e quindi posso capiscere molto, ma parlo quasi niente. E quindi lasciatemi cambiare all'inglese. Sorry for that. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for these very nice words of welcome. I'm, of course, also very grateful to Marco Ventura, an old friend and colleague, for having got that idea of inviting me. And thank you, all of you, for being here and showing an interest in the issue, freedom of religion or belief. I'm, in particular, looking forward to a discussion. I mean, for me, presentation and discussion is like, yeah, I mean, this is the beginning is my presentation, but this really should encourage you to put all your questions on the table. I don't promise I have all the answers, but we should discuss whatever you find important. And my presentation will be a little bit sketchy, I mean, also giving the time constraints. But when going through a number of issues, I mean, the common thread, the golden thread running through it is, in fact, yeah, this is a surprisingly provocative right, freedom of religion or belief. Surprisingly provocative, because first of all, you might think freedom of religion is well established. It's enshrined in virtually all constitutions worldwide, including, of course, in the Italian Constitution, Article 19, if I've looked it up correctly, in the European Convention of Human Rights, Article 9, in the Universal Declaration of the United Nations, Article 18, in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, again, Article 19. I will not bombard you with any further technicalities, but you see, I mean, it's really enshrined in numerous constitutional and international legal documents. On top of that, as already Marco said in his introductory words. Freedom of religion or belief is often praised as the first human right, as the mother of human rights. So it also plays an important role in the very genesis of the idea of universal rights. Furthermore, it serves as a gate opener for other rights of freedom. So from freedom of religion, we can move to freedom of expression, to freedom of assembly, freedom of association. So a gateway to freedom in general. And again, widely appreciated in that function. So if there's any human right that has the aura of a classical human right, then it's religious freedom. But classical rights usually are not provocative. But freedom of religion or belief is pretty provocative, and you can see that once you scratch the surface. At the surface, there's a lot of agreement among governments, but also among religious communities and in many societies. At the surface, you find consensus agreement. Once you scratch the surface a bit, what you will see is a lot of ambiguities, ambiguous rhetoric. And now let me turn first to governance, and from there to religious communities, and finally to societies at large. Now, governments. I have in fact visited numerous countries in my capacity as UN rapporteur, and in particular also conducting real fact-finding missions. When talking with governments, with government representatives, the usual response you receive is, yes, of course, freedom of religion or belief. Yes, but. Yes, but. And sometimes it's actually a very big but. So let me give you a few examples. Yes, freedom of religion, but only freedom for real religions. I mean, that's, for instance, something you might hear in a country like Egypt or Jordan. Freedom of religion for the divinely revealed religions. In theory, this includes Judaism. Okay, there are no Jews in the country, so we can forget that. Christianity, Islam. So freedom of religion, but in fact you have two options. Okay, being Christian, a number of Christian denominations exist in the country, or being Muslim. Two options. In some countries like Indonesia, you have 6 options. In China, you have 5 options. In Jordan, you have 3 or 2 options. In Saudi Arabia, you have 1 option. I mean, the Saudis are honest enough not to use the word freedom. When the Saudi ambassador takes the floor in the UN talking on this right, they will merely refer to the right to religion, leaving out freedom. Because if it's only one option, either you are a faithful Muslim or you are doomed to end in hell. I mean, what is freedom here? Yeah? But, I mean, this is really something you see happening in many countries. They give freedom of religion, but at the same time, they define the options. I mean, you have a number of predefined options, and here, I mean, the human rights approach says no, no, no. This cannot be the business of a government to define what options are left to human beings. Freedom of religion or belief as a human right starts with the self-understanding, with the self-definition of human beings. All of them. They can say who they are, how they want to be respected, as believers or as non-believers. So the starting point is always the self-understanding of human beings. Another example of yes, but. Freedom of religion, yes, but you first have to get a license. I mean, that's, for instance, something I observed in a country like Kazakhstan or in many Central Asian countries. I mean, they promise freedom of religion in their constitutions, but you always have to apply for a license first. So if you want to sell religious literature, you need a special license, which will be expired after a short while. So you have to apply and yet again apply, always working with the bureaucracy, fighting with the bureaucracy. If you want to import religious literacy, more than 2 or 3 copies for your personal use, again, you need a special license. You have to apply for that. If you want to do missionary work, and missionary work starts with telling your neighbor sitting in the bus next to you what you believe, you need a special license. So, I mean, you have that promise, freedom of religion, but you have to apply, to apply, to apply. And for a religious community to be allowed to even exercise its basic functions, it requires a registration, and they call it recognition. I mean, what is that? Freedom of religion as a human right, but the state first wants you to apply for recognition. Again, no way. I mean, this is totally wrong. If you read the very first sentences of the mother document of international human rights protection, the Universal Declaration, it starts with recognition. Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. That's the starting point. And there we have recognition. But recognition not as a result of an administrative approval procedure, recognition not as a result of negotiations, but recognition in terms of a basic insight. I mean, that is where the rule of law starts, recognizing people, everyone, in their inherent dignity and in their inalienable human rights. That's the starting point. Okay. Another example, yes, freedom of religion, fine, but within the limits of the law. Within limits. Okay, that's a delicate issue because freedom of religion or belief can be limited. True. You can even find certain limitation clauses in international human rights law. If you read these clauses, you will find one word which is the most important. It's a little word, sometimes overlooked. That little word is only. Limitations, only if, a number of ifs, only ifs, only ifs. Only if you have a good reason for that, only if you meet all the criteria, only if it's really the ultimate resort, only if you keep the interference to the minimum needed for some very important goals to be achieved, only if, which means, I mean, limitations cannot be imposed arbitrarily. I mean, this is not the business of the government. But those who deem limitations necessary really have to bear the burden of justification. I mean, it requires a complicated justification process. And this is something that many governments ignore, like, for instance, the government of Vietnam. And they impose limitations as they see fit. They say freedom of religion, okay, and then they limit it. So every religious community have to submit an annual plan mid of October with all their activities for the next year. All their little processions, their youth work, everything. And then they have to apply again for everything. And always move in the limits of a law which is not even clearly defined, which means for the government, for law enforcement agencies, I mean, they have carte blanche to impose whatever restrictions they see fit. So in the end, in a country like Vietnam, the promise of religious freedom remains empty. The states do not deliver. So you see, I mean, the endorsement of freedom of religion or belief is superficial. There are lots of caveats, lots of buts, lots of limitations, of restrictions, of twists. And the question is why? So what is really so challenging about freedom of religion? What is so provocative for governments? Yeah, some governments want to preserve an existing religious hegemony. I mean, this is something we particularly observe in the Middle East, where governments have a tendency to stage themselves as custodians of religious truth or of religious purity claims. I mean, this currently happens mainly under the auspices of Islam. This is of the Hindu nation. The Hindu nation. Or in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, under the auspices of Buddhism. I mean, some people are pretty surprised to see that also very restrictive political agendas are being pursued in the name of Buddhism. Or the Russian Orthodox Church, Russia, also acting in a very hostile, aggressive manner against Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, against Protestant denominations. So again, here the claim is not truth, the claim is identity, the national legacy, a national heritage, and religion being a main defining factor of that national heritage. So the target groups are not the non-believers, heretics, but rather foreign religions, foreign sects, foreign missionaries, foreign donors, foreign minorities, apparently, allegedly acting as fifth columns. So you can also put that under the heading of religious xenophobia. And there are lots of examples. I would say the examples of religious xenophobia are even more widespread globally than the examples of governments staging themselves as custodians of religious truth claims. But then, sometimes there's yet another pattern. Religion may not even be the main issue for governments acting in such restrictive manners. Sometimes what mainly challenges them is the F component of freedom of religion. Freedom. It's a freedom component. Because you cannot have freedom of religion without freedom of expression, without freedom of assembly and other rights to freedom. And the more authoritarian a government is, regardless of whether it's a secular government or a religious government, the more authoritarian it is, the higher the likelihood of resorting to restrictions, because for authoritarian governments, it's always dangerous to see people meeting, speaking, communicating. Sometimes I'm reminded of a fairy tale, I think you all know it, the fairy tale of the Emperor's New Garments. Do you know that? A fairy tale, an Andersen fairy tale. The Emperor is naked. Naked. But, I mean, all these people in court, I mean, they all bow and admire the new garments of the emperor until a little child starts laughing, and then the spell is gone. And this is exactly what many governments like China, Vietnam fear. They're actually naked in terms of democratic legitimacy. They are stark naked. They never expose themselves to the reality check of free and unmanipulated elections. So, I mean, and they cover that nakedness by creating the illusion that there is a seamless identity of the party and the people. Seamless identity, identity of interest. So, and once people start to articulate their interests freely, I mean, that can already amount to challenges of the party monopoly. And this is the reason why countries like China are so nervous also when it comes to freedom of religion. I mean, they don't care about religion any longer. It's not like in the old days when belief systems clashed. Here, the post-religious communist creed versus traditional religious creeds. It's not a fight between creeds any longer, but it's really the control obsession of authoritarian governments, leading them to these extreme actions. So issues of incarnation of the Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, Buddhist dignitaries. I mean, really, it's the fear of freedom and including of freedom of religion or belief. So this is a challenge posed to governments, in particular authoritarian governments. Freedom of religion or belief is in the way of their control obsessions. Now let's move to religious communities. So you could maybe think religious communities are the ones benefiting from freedom of religion. Okay, it's about religious communities. And indeed, I mean, many religious communities do appreciate this human right. But again, at a closer look, you might face a lot of ambiguities, also in religious language, also in theological language, about freedom of religion. Let me take the example of the Catholic Church, because I'm myself a more or less loyal son of the Catholic Church, like I think many of us. And today, the Catholic Church is a staunch defender of religious freedom. But as you all know, the breakthrough towards acknowledging religious freedom took place only during the Second Vatican Council. Until previously, the Catholic Church was extremely skeptical. I mean, actually condemning religious freedom as one of the errors of the modern age. As, to quote the Syllabus Errorum of the 19th century, the path towards the pestilence of indifferentism. So very, very critical positions. And even today, if you look a little bit more closely, you find a lot of nervousness about freedom of religion or belief among members of the Russian Orthodox Church, for instance, but also among conservative Muslims, conservative Jews, and many others. Why? Freedom of religion deals with religion, but it deals with religion from a human rights perspective. So right holders, strictly speaking, are not the religions. Right holders are human beings. All human beings, including dissidents, including critics, including competitors, rivals, human beings. And now the question, sometimes raised also in theological disputes, is, doesn't this mean that man rises above God? That the human being puts himself, herself above God? I mean, this was exactly the position of the Catholic Church before the Second Vatican Council. I mean, a general skepticism vis-à-vis human rights, in particular freedom of religion or belief. So the fear that freedom of religion or belief would mean a post-religious anthropocentric ideology would finally trump religion. And religion would become a matter of personal choices, personal little preferences, personal taste in a consumer market of spiritual offers. And that is an anxiety still existing nowadays. One should not underestimate the nervousness that freedom of religion or belief as a human right can cause among religious traditionalists of all different traditions. Now, I mean, what can we say about that? Human rights and freedom of religion or belief actually do not propagate a particular anthropocentric worldview. No. Actually, they don't propagate any worldview. They take seriously the diversity of worldviews, religious and non-religious. And so taking religion seriously, taking belief seriously, means you have to realize, I mean, religion as a social reality only exists in the plural. Religion is religions, different belief systems. And the more you observe them, the more you realize how different the contents are of the various religious creeds, but also the various religious norms, the more you become aware, I mean, that really religions epitomize irreconcilably different viewpoints, irreconcilably different points of view. The question then is, what can be the common denominator? How can we give legal protection to religion without singling out one particular creed for extra treatment at the expense of all others? Which is actually happening in many parts of the world. Now, the answer, the only common denominator that allows us also to give legal protection is the human being. So going to those who profess their various religious components, really going into totally different directions. Those who practice religions, those who worship or do not worship. The common denominator, the only common denominator running through that huge diversity, that broad range of different religious belief systems and practices is human beings. And that's why the only way to do justice to that diversity and give legal recognition to diversity is focus on human beings. So human beings are the right holders, and that's why freedom of religion or belief deals with religion, but always through empowering human beings. Not only traditional believers, but also skeptics, non-believers, dissidents. That is really the human rights approach, and something that especially religious traditionalists to this very day often find troublesome, the more closely they see what's happening there. There's also one term that sometimes creates discussions, and it's a term you find in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's the term choice. Choice. Religion should be a matter of every individual's choice. Now, from a theological point of view, regardless whether this is Catholic or Protestant or Hindu or Islamic, choice sounds like a very strange concept. Choice. So is that really reconcilable with maybe traditional notions of calling? So where then religion is a matter of a human being's destiny, predestined by God. Can religion become a matter of choice? Isn't the term choice a concept that seems to be much closer to the world of shopping malls? Question. The answer is, let's focus on choice just as a legal notion. As a legal concept, it's really indispensable, but the idea is not that religions per se should be turned into commodities in a spiritual consumer market. But as a legal concept, choice is indispensable because it creates a space in which people can really practice their convictions freely. Let me invoke the analogy of marriage. Here again, international human rights law speaks about everyone having a right to choose one's own partner, one's own spouse. Most people would agree that their personal experience of marriage is not a question of choice. Then issues like destiny, fate, calling seems to capture much better what people really experience. The existential dimension of marriage and also of other important questions of human life can never be fully captured by a notion like choice. Nonetheless, also when it comes to marriage, choice is a legal concept that serves the purpose of providing a space so that really people can follow their personal feelings, that they can find their personal determination without any coercive interferences from anyone. So, given a reality of forced marriages, coercive interferences in that sphere, choice is an indispensable legal concept for marriage, and I would say likewise in the area of religion, in the area of belief. So people need that space in order to develop an authentic faith, which from an internal perspective will always be much more than just a matter of personal preference, taste, and choice. So somehow we have to translate also between the legal terminology and religious phenomenology, and if we use one and the same term for both, we could easily end up with lots of misunderstandings and confusion. Now I come to my last area in which freedom of religion is provocative, and that's in societies at large. And here I would like to focus on Western societies in particular. Now, the previous examples, authoritarian governments, religious traditionalists, I mean, they usually have a problem with freedom. In Western societies, we take freedom for granted. Liberal societies are defined by an interest in preserving maximum freedom. So here, freedom is not really what makes freedom of religion provocative. Maybe it's the other component, religion. And so in many Western societies, people wonder, I mean, what can the contribution of religion be for a liberal, open, free society? So here, it's really the other component, religious freedom, libertà religiosa, the religious component, that entails an element of provocation. Let me give you one example that shocked me from my own country. I live in Germany, and I always thought Germany is a rather open society, also dealing with religious diversity in a rather relaxed manner. I was actually pretty shocked when 4 years ago we had an extremely aggressive discussion in Germany over many months on the issue of male circumcision. So, ritual, religiously motivated male circumcision, something that many Jews, but also Muslims, would consider to be an indispensable element of their religious identity. Male circumcision, I mean, it's a complicated issue. I don't want to go into the details of that issue. It's complicated. And also from a human rights perspective, one can raise a lot of questions. But what really shocked me was a widespread lack of awareness or a lack of willingness to appreciate that for many people, this is an existential question. That this really is a question affecting the core of their religious being, of their religious identity as a Jew or as a Muslim. A lack of understanding, sometimes even presented in a gesture of enlightenment, not really enlightenment, a gesture of enlightenment, an enlightenment with the outstretched forefinger, please adapt to modern times, but with, at the same time, turning a deaf ear to the demands of religious communities, who, I mean, for many of whom this is really something that would, if it really were forbidden, cause them to leave the country. So in the end, we managed to find a legal solution, so then the discussion ebbed down again. But nonetheless, I mean, that really made a lasting effect on me, a lasting impression, to experience an aggressive form of secularism, doctrinal, an aggressive form of maybe even liberalism that is actually pretty anti-liberal in its effects. So, I mean, what happens then sometimes is that we may be in danger of simply equating freedom with a particular lifestyle, with one particular urban, detached, religiously detached, maybe even ironic lifestyle. Okay, I mean, it's a lifestyle that I personally understand, I appreciate, but a free society, a more substantive liberalism should be more than just one particular lifestyle thought to be applicable to everyone. So if we make that equation, that wrong equation of liberalism and one particular lifestyle, then actually liberalism can breed anti-liberal attitudes. And we can currently see that happening, for instance, in that very strange Burkini obsession in France. Yeah, so not that I'm personally very much fond of the burkini, but this is actually not the issue. Yeah, I mean, turning the way people dress when walking the beaches, whether they have a headscarf and a gown in the sun, which is maybe difficult, turning that into a test case of liberal values, I mean, really means you turn liberal values into a token of excluding people. And I think you all have seen the nasty pictures of people, even police, surrounding a woman, forcing her to display her naked arms, so in order to demonstrate a liberal attitude. I mean, what is that? The enforcement of an attitude based on an understanding, or rather misunderstanding, of liberalism amounting to one particular lifestyle, which then is turned into the binding model for everyone. So, I mean, there is a real danger that liberalism may lose its own inherent liberality if we close our mind, if we become narrow-minded, if we don't see that freedom can actually manifest itself in different ways, in different lifestyles, in different convictions, in non-religious ways, but also in religious ways, and maybe sometimes in ways we don't fully understand. I personally don't understand the burkini, but that's not the issue. I mean, the test case for liberality, for a free society, is really to give space also for manifestations of freedom that we don't fully understand, as long as no harm is done to others. I mean, there are also precautions and caveats needed, but I mean, that space is really what renders a society free and liberal. I mean, the same with secularity. Secularism, secularity, I mean, sometimes it's understood, I would rather say misunderstood, as pushing religion into a private sphere. Instead, if you take freedom of religion or belief as a starting point also for defining a more demanding secularity of the state, it should be the opposite, because freedom of religion or belief, expressis verbis, also includes public manifestations of religious convictions and religious practices. I mean, whether you look at the European Convention or the UN standard, it's always freedom of individuals, but in community with others, in private and in public. So for some people, religion may be just their private affair. Religion can be something very private, even intimate. But for many people, it's not something they would like to see limited to the private sphere. They also want to manifest their religious orientations through dress codes, through public processions, through public demonstrations, public debates, architecture, visible and audible symbols of religious diversity. And this is something that the state should not only permit, but the state should provide the conditions for this to be possible. So my understanding of secularity, and here also freedom of religion or belief has a healthy provocation, is secularity should be a space-providing principle. So what we usually focus on, the separation of state and church, or state and religious community, the functional differentiation, is just one side of the coin. It's the quote-unquote negative precondition for a positive investment. Because, I mean, you need to disentangle state power and religion in order for this space to unfold. But it's a space that the state is responsible to create and to defend, to defend against external threats, but also against internal dangers of implosion. Secularity as a space providing principle. And here, and this is almost my last word on this, it's a space that should be open, but not empty. And I think here in our Western societies, especially when it comes to discussing secularity, I think we tend to confuse openness with emptiness. The open space is important, but it's a space that can be filled. I mean, whether it's actually filled, that remains to be seen, and that is really dependent on the various religious, also non-religious actors. But it can be filled, it should be filled with different voices, with different pictures, with different dress codes. So all this diversity, all these different colors and also different voices, different noises, so it should be an open space but not a silent space, rather a noisy space, a colorful space filled with human life, human commitment. And in that sense, I think because we tend to confuse things and also to forget that secularity is a positive task, is a rather demanding task for the state. Freedom of religion, I believe, has something to say, has this element of healthy provocation. To conclude, freedom of religion is a provocative right. It's surprisingly provocative. Provocative, however, as I would say, in a healthy way. For governments, freedom of religion serves as a reminder that respect for human rights lies at the heart of democracy, against populist notions of democracy as sheer majoritarianism. Democracy is defined by human rights. Rule of law is defined by human rights. And you cannot have human rights, you cannot have democracy, rule of law, without freedom of religion. So freedom of religion strengthens political legitimacy, although it no doubt challenges party monopolies, political corruption, authoritarian structures. Here, a challenge that we need. For religious communities, freedom of religion serves as a reminder that authentic belief is free belief. And we need guarantees for free believing. Freedom of religion is not only important for minorities, sometimes for minorities that can even become a matter of life and death. But I would say it's in a different way also, and not less important for majorities, because sometimes majorities are in danger to subscribe to that wrong equation, our turf, our territory, our religion, so ending up in a territorialized understanding of religion, by which then the breathing space that is needed for any spirituality, for any religious persuasiveness and attractiveness to unfold is lost. So also majority religions have a lot to gain by that open space guaranteed through freedom of religion and belief. So, but not all majority religions understand it. There is a danger, and we see it increasingly, that we might even come back to the old slogan, cuius regio eius religio. Have a look at the refugee crisis. Hungary closing its borders. Yeah, and there's a lot of religious xenophobia, Islamophobia part of that. The territorialization of religion destroys religion, in particular majority religion. So here, freedom of religion and belief can serve as a very important reminder. And finally, for societies, including our Western societies, liberal societies by and large, freedom of religion serves as a reminder that freedom is not just a lifestyle matter, cannot be equated with one particular lifestyle that is then thought to provide the model for everyone. It is a reminder that something more existential is at stake when we talk about freedom and a free society. And also it serves as a reminder that a secular constitution should provide open space, not empty space. I wish that space to be noisy. And now, after monopolizing the talk, I would like to have a bit more noise maybe also coming from the benches there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your lecture, so deep in knowledge and especially so instructive in terms of drawing a global picture through these three categories of authoritarian governments, religious traditionalists and illiberal liberals, which is a fantastic way of leading us through the global conversation, pointing at areas of crisis, but at the same time conveying a sense that the challenge is everywhere for everybody. Possiamo passare a una discussione, come avete sentito. Heiner è desideroso, me lo ha detto fin da quando ci siamo incontrati. Oggi non c'è bisogno naturalmente di fare le domande in inglese perché ha l'headset e non c'è bisogno soprattutto di fare domande sofisticate, complesse o da esperti, perché come avete capito e sentito dalla sua esperienza anche di missioni di fact-finding è abituato a riflettere su questi temi su registri più vari. Prego. Abbiamo un microfono.
I don't understand and I don't hear anything. No, I don't understand. Doesn't work.
Parlo in italiano.
Ok, per favore parla lentamente. Yeah. Perché la traduzione della machine non funziona. Now it works. Okay, okay. Now you can speak as fast as you like. Thank you. Okay.
Allora, deve essere un problema difficile se nemmeno l'Italia dispone di un...
I don't hear anything. But problema difficile, I did understand, yes. Yeah, I think parla lentamente, credo che so capiscere.
Sì.
Yeah.
Il problema deve essere difficile,
Yeah.
se nemmeno l'Italia dispone di una legge sulla libertà religiosa.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Nella sua relazione lei ha fatto riferimento alla Germania. Ecco, io credo che il problema sia più complesso. Lei ne parla anche sull'ultimo numero della rivista Concilium. Il problema della circoncisione dei bambini si è posto in Germania in seguito alla sentenza del Tribunale di Colonia. Quando il Tribunale è stato investito da un ricorso di un adulto ebreo che ha sentito la circoncisione subita da bambino come una lesione della sua integrità corporale. La risposta del Tribunale è stata necessariamente ambigua, perché evidentemente stava emergendo un conflitto inedito, impensabile fino a poco tempo fa. C'è un conflitto fra il particolarismo religioso, l'ebraismo, l'Islam, che prevedono la circoncisione dei bambini, e il diritto universale all'integrità corporale. Il Tribunale di Cologna, nel rilevare la problematicità della questione, ha fatto riferimento anche al battesimo dei bambini nelle chiese cristiane. Può reggere ancora a lungo immaginare uno scontro fra bene e male. Lei ha detto esplicitamente, ha scritto anche sulla rivista, in Germania è riemerso un pregiudizio antisemita su questa questione. Ecco, io non credo che sia un pregiudizio antisemita quando la società è interrogata su questo conflitto nuovo. Dobbiamo essere grati, io credo, agli anabattisti, che per primi hanno posto questo problema. Nascere non vuol dire appartenere automaticamente a una comunità religiosa. Deve essere lasciato aperto il problema della scelta. La ringrazio.
Take it now. You want to grapple a few? Heiner, you want a reply?
Yes. I mean, this is, of course, a position existing within various religious communities. I mean, you referred to the Anabaptists, who do not baptize children. They say, okay, we need a certain age, a certain maturity for the human being to really be aware of what happens when entering a religious community, when having full membership. So they postpone baptism. And that is a theological position that may have many advantages. We have similar discussions also within Judaism and Islam concerning circumcision. I mean, there are minorities of Jews and of Muslims who say, no, we could postpone that until the child or the young person has reached a certain age. The point is, I mean, these are religious internal discussions, and I appreciate those discussions, and they're also arguments. But the state cannot impose that. I mean, just imagine the state interfering with child baptism, forbidding that. Admittedly, the issue of circumcision is more complicated than baptism because it has that element of also physical integrity being somehow affected. And that's why I understand that it is a matter of controversy, and I would not say the controversy as such already betrays anti-Semitism. Sometimes it's the tone. I was really shocked about the tone. But of course it's a legitimate topic also for a society. Germany, the German legislator, in the end decided we will also enter some stipulations. I mean, health conditions, so that no damage is being done, but we cannot forbid the practice as such. I mean, we stipulate health conditions, hygienic conditions. This is also something happening in some other countries. Okay, there is a space also for the legislator to step in, but forbidding this would be a far-reaching intervention. And this is the last word I want to say on this. If you look at the Children's Rights Convention, there is also an article on freedom of religion or belief. And that article says, yes, parents act as custodians for the right of the child. And that function as custodian also can include religious socialization processes, also religious initiation rules. So parents really are the ones taking those decisions. Of course, I mean, if a real damage is being threatened against the child, the state might intervene. I mean, this is not carte blanche for everything. But religious socialization by parents is explicitly recognized in the international conventions on the rights of the child. So I think, in principle, this is a dimension we have to respect.
Una prossima domanda? Prego.
Grazie per il suo interessante intervento. Lei ha usato il termine provocazione, però credo che molti di noi hanno capito, anziché provocazione, sfida, challenge, una deep challenge, una sfida profonda, da cui emergono alcuni blind spots, dei punti ciechi, delle diversi attori che sono coinvolti in questa sfida. Mi domandavo se, siccome il ritratto che lei ha proposto di questa sfida è pluristratificato o comunque molto differenziato, se c'è una sfera in particolare della vita delle persone che lei considera più adatta per rispondere a questa sfida. Se per esempio il diritto è la sfera più adatta, la cultura bassa, quella alta, quella teologica, quella filosofica, quale sfera ha le risorse migliori per rispondere a questa sfida così complicata?
Yeah, I think challenge is a key word here. And in English, I mean, Mark and I had a discussion this afternoon. In English, the word provocation, maybe it's a bit closer to challenge than in Italian. So maybe the translation, provocation in English is rather positive. Yeah, I like to be provocative. I'm not always as provocative as I would like to be, yeah? But it covers a positive meaning in English, maybe less so in Italian. So challenge, okay, provocation in English very close, in Italian maybe less so. Yeah, I think you gave the answer to your own question when pointing to these various levels of action. I would indeed say all of them are relevant. I mean, there's not one level that I would particularly single out. I gave the example of the term choice, which as a legal term makes sense, but in religious phenomenology sounds strange. Which, I mean, says we do need a multi-dimensional approach and also translations happening between various disciplines. I mean, applying a legal term to theology is strange. The other way around is even stranger. I mean, just imagine theological terminology entering the law. It would destroy the rule of law entirely. Yeah? So we have to put these things, to keep them distinct, but also really translate. Otherwise, misunderstandings will come about. Yeah, so it's a challenge for religious communities. So that includes theology. But actually, I would also like to see more philosophical approaches to this. But then the legal sphere, politics, certainly. I mean, and somehow, I mean, you said it when posing the question. Yes, it's a multidimensional challenge, and the response must be accordingly complex.
C'è ancora qualcuno? Prego.
Okay. Yeah.
Basically, I can speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you define religion? I mean,
yeah.
The religion means that there should be, at least in principle, a church, some, how can I say, specific personnel, like priests, friars, and the likes. And this is the first, or a small community of people believing some specific idea regarding godness, divinity, and the likes. It can be defined as a religion. And the second question is, you spoke about freedom of religion, but I'm wondering whether freedom of religion means also freedom from religion. These are the two short questions.
Okay. I mean, the second question is easy. The first question is complicated. So let me let me start with the second one. The answer is yes. Of course, freedom of religion means freedom also from religion. Otherwise, it would not be an act of freedom. Yeah? So freedom means you can do something, but you can also decide not to do it. You can worship, you can go to church, but you can also stay at home. So it's really freedom of religion, because finally, it's always freedom of human beings in religion. So, so it's really very broad, and this so-called negative, I don't even like that word, the negative freedom, the freedom not to do something, not to confess, not to participate, is as important as the positive. There's no hierarchy. Yeah, I mean, either you take freedom or you leave it. Yeah, so I mean, these are necessary implications. So I mean, that's the easy question. The other one is much more complicated and, of course, highly delicate. So even before I assumed my position as rapporteur for the UN, I got an invitation to the Iranian embassy in Berlin. So the ambassador himself invited me to an iftar dinner, and we had all sorts of talks which were not entirely innocent. So, and I mean, the one question was really exactly that. We are in favor of freedom of religion, but what about sects? And I knew exactly he was alluding to the Baha'is. It was very clear. The Baha'is are heavily persecuted in Iran. Yeah? And I mean, how nice it would be for the Iranian government to say, yes, we are in favor of freedom of religion, okay, but these are sects. Yeah? How nice, how easy. No. And that, I mean, bearing that in mind, of course, you can see how complicated it is. And the United Nations Committee in charge of this question, of defining the civil and political rights, and okay. Some 20 years ago, created a formula that I have cited in almost all my reports. It's the following. Article 18 protects theistic, non-theistic, atheistic beliefs, as well as the right not to profess any belief. So it's very broad. It's very broad. In order not to end up in, let's say, in trivialities, because otherwise you could say, okay, my soccer club is my religion. Yeah? My beer, that's my liturgy. In order not to end up in total trivialities, I would at the same time insist that freedom of religion or belief has an existential dimension. So it's about the profound identity-shaping positions, convictions, that also permeate a person's life, life-shaping. It's also very practical. So if you deny a person to live in accordance with his or her religion, I mean, really, you confront this person with an existential dilemma. So it's not about trivialities, but otherwise it's very, very, very open. So the trick is not to directly answer the first question, not to say we define religion and then we have all these options, but to insist on the element of subjective seriousness. And the European Court for Human Rights also coined a formula some time ago in order to see whether a certain viewpoint that you have really qualifies under freedom of religion or belief. And the formula is this position should show a certain degree of cogency seriousness, cohesion, and importance. So it's a rather open formula. Cogency, there's an element of existential urge. It's cogent. It's not, okay, an idea that you happen to have today. You have seen a nice Hollywood film and now you have an inspiration. Tomorrow it's all forgotten. Yeah? Cogency, something existential, seriousness, cohesion. It should also manifest itself in your behavior some way. Yeah? So, but otherwise it's very open. So the subjective seriousness, cohesion, I mean, that's the entry point, but we don't have, let's say, a definition. This is religion once and for all, and this falls, and this is outside. So, I mean, the law then really finds its contours and adapts its contours ever again in responding to new situations. Yeah, new claims. Sometimes you have to enlarge the understanding. Sometimes you feel, okay, now we are lost into realities. Let's be a little bit more careful. So, no final definition, but nonetheless we have a few workable formulas within which we can see whether a position generally falls within that scope.
Visto una mano giù in fondo e poi Lucia. Prego.
Io ho avuto gran parte della risposta alla domanda che volevo fare dall'ultimo intervento. Volevo sottolineare come credo nella post-secolarizzazione ci sia stato, a mio avviso, un deincapsulamento di quelli che erano le linee guida della religione, e quindi al giorno d'oggi ognuno ha la possibilità di farsi un modello, un self-constructed model della propria religione, e credo che questo porti a un disorientamento generalizzato. Io non sono d'accordo con il collega di prima relativamente alla posizione degli anabattisti. Io come genitore porto la mia testimonianza rispetto alla scelta che ho fatto io, e credo la possibilità di dare questa scelta su come vivere questo labile confine che ormai c'è tra religione e spiritualità possa essere fatto avendo un approccio, come dire, multiculturale, cioè portare i diversi esempi anche all'interno di quelle che sono le nostre credenze, perché credo che i riferimenti su ciò che è veramente la spiritualità esistano nelle diverse religioni, sia monoteistiche che più filosofiche. E quindi le chiedo, lei cosa ne pensa rispetto alla possibilità di avere un approccio multiculturale a quello che è la religione e la spiritualità individuale? Grazie.
Okay, I'm very sympathetic with agendas of pluralism, especially in schools, but also parents may decide that they want to familiarize their children also with other religions. So, for instance, when visiting a city, to not only to see the church, but also to go to a mosque. And so generally sensitizing children from early on to diversity in that sphere is certainly something positive. At the same time, I mean, religious issues are issues very deeply ingrained in a person's life world, and especially in family. So now, what will you do? Will you celebrate Christmas or will you not celebrate Christmas? Yeah, maybe there's hardly a third possibility. Yeah? And so the religious upbringing of a child will most likely also reflect the basic identity-shaping convictions, values of parents, which is fine. And here again, I would maybe use the same formula, now putting it to a different use. Openness is not emptiness. I mean, that would be a misunderstanding to think, okay, no religious socialization, all the options are open. That sounds very abstract. I mean, having abstract options in the end would mean, I mean, the child will not learn any of the religious languages. I mean, it's really like learning languages. There will most likely be one mother tongue, most likely. So, and in most families, okay, they may be very open, very diverse, and maybe even parents have different religions, but it's not an abstract openness. I mean, let's face it. Let's face it, usually we see the world from one particular angle, as open-minded as we claim to be, which is good. And we can then move from that angle maybe also to other angles, but it's not that we have them as just abstract possibilities, options, equally available to all of us. I mean, human life somehow is centered life and also centered around convictions. I'm in favor of openness, but not, let's say, an imposed emptiness, which is certainly not your point, but sometimes you can find that. Even an aggressive stance against parents socializing their children in religious terms. And that would certainly not be in line with freedom of religion or belief, also not in line with the Children's Rights Convention. I see your body language, you seem to fully agree with what I say. Thank you.
Lucia? Aspetti il microfono.
So, thank you for your talk. I was wondering, you talked of a choice, and I feel this choice in the religious field as a form of recognition of a declaration to belonging to a community. So in that sense, it's something that is deeply related to our understanding and interpretation of freedom in our society, in our culture, like to say. But in religion, it is true, there is a matter, or what is at stake is a personal adhesion to a call, to, like to say, a feeling or of a perception of something that remains on a transcendental level, on a transcendental plan. And that goes beyond what is the space and the time, the human space and the human time. So I think maybe there is a tension in between these two different levels. So a public recognition of the existence of a community, and the idea that the human plan or the human space and time are not the only levels that we have to consider. I think in the religious diversity that we are facing today, there is a little bit this matter of saying if there are different truths or if there are different beliefs, what can we do in order to guarantee the coexistence of these different presences in our society? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure whether I got your point when you said there are tensions. I mean, first of all, sure, freedom of religion has a strong community dimension, first of all. By the way, this is true for all human rights. Just imagine freedom of assembly, freedom of association, but also freedom of expression. I mean, if you just express your views, no one listening, it's not much fun. Yeah? So it's always a community of people getting together. Rights are enjoyed by every human being prior to community membership, really the human being as human being, but the enjoyment, the exercise always has a community dimension, which is also important. It's not only a second layer. Then, of course, as you said, many religions see themselves as originating from a higher authority. So also they derive guidance from a higher authority, and that guidance also can sometimes be in conflict to maybe expectations otherwise existing in a society. And here, I mean, one it almost sounds trivial, but nonetheless it's worth highlighting. One component that is really indispensable is religious practice must be non-coercive practice. I mean, freedom of religion or belief recognizes, let me say again, not religions, but human beings in their religious orientations, also in their religious practices, but provided that this does not do harm to others. So this is really a precondition. So that's why also freedom of religion is not, as some people would say, and I remember having heard bizarre stuff also in the circumcision discussion, that freedom of religion or belief is simply the opening up for all sorts of religious laws entering then the state, the public domain. No, it's human beings that deserve recognition, the maximum space compatible with equal rights for everyone else. It's a space, but it's not, let's say, again, it's not an unstructured, empty space, so one has to make sure, and this is really a task that also lawmakers and the judiciary then have to face, have to carry out, that no harm is done to others. So it's only non-coercive practices that can ever be recognized. It can be very conservative practices. It can be practices which maybe also from the perspective of women's rights sometimes are strange. But here the state should not interfere too early. But whenever there is coercion, then the state has to interfere also into the internal sphere of religious communities. It's not a carte blanche. I'm not sure whether this is the answer to your question, but I mean, tensions are certainly there. Yeah? So freedom of religion or belief, I mean, also from this angle, I mean, really has challenges for the religious communities. It's not simply a blessing, okay, go on, carry on, do whatever you wish, you have the rights. No, it's really about equal dignity, equal rights, equal freedom for human beings in that sphere.
Grazie, se non ci sono e non vedo altre mani che si alzano, farei io un'ultima domanda allora a Heiner. Contrariamente a quello che pensavamo quando l'abbiamo invitato, sapendo qual era la scadenza del mandato di Heiner, e quindi pensavamo di averlo invitato qui a raccontare la sua esperienza ex post, Heiner è rimasto in servizio e quindi ancora oggi è in qualche modo tenuto ad una, come dire, a un profilo istituzionale più prudente rispetto al fatto che è ancora in office. E quindi il racconto della sua autobiografia come special rapporteur lo abbiamo dovuto in qualche modo lasciare da parte. Però one final question on your experience I want to put to you. Yeah, sure. I'm going in English. Yeah, sure. So I don't want to push you too much on your experience since you're still in office, right? But can you tell us, sort of single out the one experience during probably one of your missions, which was the eye-opener for a more mature vision of freedom of religion from your point of view? So the one experience that you might mention and share with us, which should be the right example of what you learned for yourself as a philosopher, as an expert in human rights, from the very experience, from the ground.
Yeah, it's not easy to, as you can imagine, now to focus on one, but I will. I mean, there were so many eye-opening, ear-opening, brain-shattering experiences, which really also challenged me in my philosophy. But let me really point to one example, and that was maybe the most heartwarming experience I have ever had in any of these country missions. It was Sierra Leone. And I always like to say that because Sierra Leone is a part of the world where usually we only have negative messages. Child soldiers, Ebola, blood diamonds, civil war, etc. And I have, in Sierra Leone, I have encountered a spirit of working together among religious communities that I found admirable. Especially given, I mean, this is a country very poor economically, with an extremely complicated legacy of civil war. But now here it was really the religious communities coming together with a clear understanding that they want to prevent religiously colorized or motivated violence, prevent that from happening. So, I mean, they, and this is what also, I mean, I found it in a way also humbling, because much of what I saw there was not human rights based in the narrow understanding. I mean, it had also different sources. The Sufi spirit. Sierra Leone is a Muslim majority country. 60-70% of the population are Muslims. But then there's also a sizable Christian population, and there are indigenous spiritual traditions, some very mixed. And so we had our liaison officer from the government had a very interesting name. His two first names were Francis Muhammad. He was born as a Muslim. He converted to Catholicism. His father remained a Muslim but assisted at the baptism. Quite amazing, but I mean, I've met many people who have converted always Islam, Christianity, Islam. It's, this is generally appreciated, very broadly appreciated. What even amazed me more was the spirit of cooperation between the various religious Islamic groups, Sunnis and Shias. And Ahmadis. Ahmadis are an Islamic minority who are really, in many parts of the world, of the Islamic world, are seen as heretics, branded as posing as Muslims. I mean, that's even a formulation in the Pakistani criminal law, posing as Muslims. Yeah? In Sierra Leone, I visited schools run by the Ahmadiyya community, but many of the teachers came from a Sunni background, others came from a Shia background, or even Christians, parents sending their kids, coming from all denominations. I visited the Interreligious Council, and it happened that the Ahmadiyya representative spoke the prayer, the Sunni sitting next to him said Amen. And what really, I mean, the reason why I'm telling this is, it's the living proof that all this rubbish we very often hear or read, that now Sunnis and Shias are doomed to hate each other due to some occurrences 14 centuries ago. It's all stupid stuff. I mean, the relationships in the Arab Peninsula are increasingly poisoned. But that poisoning is done by human beings, and sometimes then it's prolonged into an imaginary past, essentialized as if this would be like a natural disaster, like the volcano breaking out with the hot lava of hatred always being there. No, it's all rubbish. I mean, there are experiences in which people live totally peacefully together, intermarry without any problems in a country like Sierra Leone. Unfortunately, this is hardly known. So last year I went to Saudi Arabia. Of course, I couldn't do a fact-finding mission in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would never allow that to happen. But in my statement in Saudi Arabia, actually I praised Sierra Leone, conveying the message one could perhaps learn from Sierra Leone. Of course, the Saudis did not like that message. But I mean, it's really amazing to see how people can do that, how they can work together in order to prevent the virus of hatred to permeating a society. And I mean, for me, the big challenge was, I mean, it's an environment of I didn't use the word tolerance. I didn't like it. It was too lame. I said of religious open-heartedness, but not really human rights based, which I mean also could humble us in the sense of making us aware that not all the good things come from human rights organizations. I mean, human rights, I'm a human rights person. I'm totally convinced that we need human rights, but we should not claim a monopoly. Sometimes, I mean, the traces of such commitment are even older than our idea of human rights. And maybe it's sometimes good to be reminded of that. So I left Sierra Leone full of enthusiasm, but also in a humble spirit. because I learned so much from that country, which we think can only be a source of disasters and poverty. No, there's a lot of wisdom among very ordinary people and the living examples that hatred is not a natural law, as some ideologues want to have us believe.
Grazie. Grazie Heiner, e la parola al nostro Presidente per le conclusioni.
Io credo che questa sera sia stata una serata veramente un po' fuori dalla norma. Intanto abbiamo tracciato un percorso che era un po' il percorso di Bruno Kessler, no? Una fondazione che ha una prevalenza in termini numerici di ricercatori nel settore tecnico-scientifico e che decide di avere la Bruno Kessler Lecture in un settore, se volete, numericamente minoritario. Ma questo non significa che sia meno importante dei numeri più grandi che sono certamente dei due settori, quello dell'ICT e quello dei materiali dei microsistemi. E questa sera abbiamo avuto, non è fortuna, ma abbiamo avuto la possibilità, perché questa possibilità ci è stata indicata dal nostro direttore, di avere qua un professore di una grande università tedesca, che è un filosofo, ma nello stesso tempo, nel corso di questi ultimi anni, lui ha fatto un'esperienza unica, che è stata quella di essere il rapporteur delle Nazioni Unite per i diritti umani, con una particolare attenzione a diritti umani collegata a un tema che noi vediamo essere determinante nella nostra vita quotidiana, che è quella delle religioni e delle relazioni tra religioni, quindi la libertà che è nella religione ma anche per la religione. Ebbene, io sono rimasto particolarmente colpito dal fatto che questo signore, questo professore adesso, quando terminerà forse questa sua attività da rapporteur, ai suoi studenti potrà raccontare cose che non ha letto sui libri, che non derivano dalla sua esperienza di filosofo, ma derivano dalla sua esperienza di uomo di azione in paesi complicati. Quello che lui ci ha raccontato della Sierra Leone, lui non l'avrebbe potuto imparare. Lui non avrebbe potuto certamente neppure immaginare. Le sue parole finali dice che lui lì ha imparato. Capite che significato? Lui pensava di andare in un paese povero, in un paese a cui lui avrebbe dovuto donare la sua competenza, e invece è tornato avendo imparato. Bene, io credo che questa sia una lezione veramente importante. I was saying that you understand that today you are a better professor than before, because with your experience as a rapporteur, today you had some feedback, and the lecture that you had in Sierra Leone and maybe in other countries, today is a patrimonio of your cultural background, and you can transfer to your students, and this is the best things that you can do, because you can transfer what is happening today at what you touch with your hands. And this is very important, and I feel that again today with this contradiction, with these difficulties that we have, in the meantime we have great opportunities. And today we had the opportunities to listen, to learn, and to discuss with Professor Bielefeldt that I want to award with a special pin that is a pin of the Bruno Kessler Lecture. Let me try to do this like this.
Thank you very much. Grazie per la sua generosità.
No. You have to do like this. Okay. A pin has to put in this small stuff here. I hope so. Cut. It's not your case. Maybe it's more complex than to stay in Sierra Leone to do like that. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Devo ringraziare anch'io personalmente tutti per la vostra presenza e mi permetto di ricordare, proprio nello spirito di comunità della Fondazione, l'appuntamento della settimana prossima con un convegno molto importante organizzato dall'ISIG, dall'Istituto Storico Italo-Germanico, sull'eredità globale della Riforma Protestante. Vi invito, ci sono qui al desk i programmi, vi invito a prenderne uno, è un appuntamento molto importante per tutti noi, per la vita della Fondazione, e naturalmente ne approfitto anche per invitarvi fin d'ora ai prossimi appuntamenti pubblici delle scienze religiose. Avremo in novembre una lecture importante di un professore americano sul rapporto tra religione e tecnologia, appunto, e poi una lecture a fine novembre su Fatima, che sarà fatta da una esperta che sta studiando il pellegrinaggio a Fatima in modo molto innovativo e che sarà, per chi vorrà venire, una grande sorpresa su qualcosa che possiamo ritenere, come dire, scontato, dato, addirittura sepolto dal punto di vista dell'esperienza umana, ma che chi vorrà venire troverà letto, visto in una prospettiva molto affascinante, molto nuova. Grazie ancora a tutti.